I should have known better. When a stranger wires you a month's pay up front and asks only that you keep their cabin maintained through the winter, you don't ask questions, you just pack your bags and take the bus. That was my first mistake. The job ad had been vague. Caretaker needed. Remote property. Must remain on site for a duration of winter season. Room and board included. $10,000. No phone number, just an email. I thought it was too good to be true, but when rent was overdue and my car was one payment away from being repossessed, I convinced myself it was legitimate. I told myself it was just a cabin, 4 walls and a roof. What could go wrong? The bus dropped me off on a frozen roadside, hours from the nearest town. From there, I hiked with a heavy pack, snow crunching beneath my boots. The forest swallowed me, pine trees leaning heavy with ice, the air so cold it burned my lungs. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun had begun to set, casting the cabin in blood-dawing light. It was larger than I expected. 2 stories, log walls blackened with age, shutters nailed closed on most of the windows. Smoke curled from the chimney, though no one had lit a fire yet. The front porch sagged under the weight of snow. A heavy padlock hung from the door, but the key waited in an envelope taped to the wood. The envelope read only, "For the caretaker." Inside was a brass key, an old skeleton design that belonged more in a museum than on a modern lock. There was also a folded piece of paper. I opened it with numb fingers. The handwriting was sharp and hurried. Rules of the cabin: do not open the door after sundown. Do not look into the bedroom mirror after midnight. Do not let the fireplace burn out at first. I laughed. Rules for a cabin? But the more I read the words, the less funny they became. There was no explanation, no signature. Just those 3 sentences, written in thick ink, underlined as though they were not suggestions, but commands. The key slid into the padlock easily. The door groaned open, and the smell of pine smoke and dust greeted me. Inside, the cabin was cozy at first glance, a stone fireplace at the center, a wooden table with mismatched chairs, shelves lined with books and trinkets, but the air felt heavy, like stepping into a room where someone had just been arguing and left, the tension still clinging to the walls. I unpacked slowly, trying to ignore the chill crawling up my spine. The upstairs bedroom was small, with a single bed and a dresser. On the wall hung an old mirror in a carved oak frame. Its glass was tarnished, cloudy around the edges. I remembered the second rule: do not look into the bedroom mirror after midnight. I told myself it was silly, superstition, but even then, I draped a sheet over the frame before lying down. That first night, the silence pressed in from all sides. No cars, no planes, not even the sound of animals. Just the occasional creak of the cabin settling, wood groaning in the cold. I lay awake long past midnight, listening to the fire crackle dot. At some point, I must have drifted off. When I woke, the fire had dimmed to embers, and the room was colder than death. My breath fogged in the air. I scrambled to throw on more wood, sparks leaping, flames catching. The third rule throbbed in my mind: do not let the fireplace burn out. As the fire roared back to life, I heard it. A sound from upstairs, a faint tapping. I froze, every hair on my arms rising. Tap, 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 slow, deliberate. From the bedroom above, I told myself it was the house settling. Just the cold. But the sound repeated. 3 knocks, steady as a heartbeat. I crept upstairs, heart hammering. The bedroom door stood half open. Inside, the mirror loomed against the far wall, the sheet I had draped over it now lying crumpled. On the floor, I didn't want to look. God, I didn't. But my eyes dragged toward it anyway. My reflection stared back. Except it wasn't quite me. The face in the glass moved a heartbeat slower, eyes blinking a fraction behind mine, mouth twitching into a smile I didn't make. The tapping grew louder, not from the walls this time, from the mirror. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. My breath came ragged, my pulse roaring in my ears. I ran downstairs, nearly tripping over the steps, and collapsed by the fire, staring at the flames until dawn's light crept through the shutters. When I finally dared to climb back upstairs, the mirror was covered again, the sheet tucked neatly over it, as though someone or something had restored it during the night. On the dresser beneath it lay another folded piece of paper. The handwriting was the same. Rule number 4. If you hear knocking at the door after dark, do not answer, no matter what they say. I didn't laugh this time. The night felt heavier now. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows with a force that made the walls creak and groan. But inside, the silence was suffocating. There was something about it that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The only sound was the low hum of the overhead lights, flickering faintly as if they, too, were hesitant to break the oppressive stillness that seemed to hang in the air. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over me. The previous events, the knocking, the strange figure in the photograph, the oppressive silence lingered in my mind. I couldn't let it all spiral out of control, but the longer I lay there, the more I couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. The lodge didn't feel like a building anymore. It felt like a presence, like it was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I tossed and turned, trying to settle my nerves. I didn't know what to make of the knocks I had heard earlier. Could it have been the wind? The sound of something outside? The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the feeling grew, like the air around me was thickening, suffocating me with its silence. I eventually got out of bed, hoping to distract myself from the gnawing anxiety that was growing in my chest. I walked over to the window and gazed out at the dark woods. The rain had stopped, and the moon was barely visible through the thick clouds. The storm had passed, but the night still felt ominous, like the world outside was shrouded in something dark and unseen. Then I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it was louder, clearer, unmistakable. It came from outside. Faint but deliberate, like someone was gently tapping at the door. I froze, my pulse racing. Could it be the wind? I thought, but the sound had too much purpose to it. This was no ordinary gust of wind. This was a deliberate knock. It was real. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew more insistent. Knock, 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 dot. I slowly walked toward the door, my heart pounding. Every instinct told me to stay away, to lock the door and pretend I hadn't heard it. But something drew me toward it, a compulsion. I reached for the handle, feeling the cold metal under my fingers. My breath hitched in my throat as I slowly turned it. I opened the door, and nothing. The hallway was empty, silent. Just the same dim lighting that had greeted me when I first arrived. No one was there. I stood in the doorway, still holding the handle. The knocking had stopped as soon as I opened the door, leaving only the eerie stillness behind. I looked down the hallway, and it was as empty as it had been earlier. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting just beyond the corner. I closed the door and locked it, trying to ignore the rising unease gnawing at my insides. I had to be imagining things. There was no one here but me, but the silence in the room felt different now, heavy, oppressive. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the very air around me was thickening. I turned back to the bed, but as I was about to sit down, I heard it again, scratching. It started soft, almost imperceptible, like someone was dragging something across the floor. I stood still, holding my breath, listening. It was coming from somewhere nearby. Slowly, the scratching grew louder. Wasn't coming from the window this time, it was coming from the walls. The floorboards creaked in rhythm with the sound, and the entire room seemed to pulse with the unsettling hum of whatever was hidden just beyond the surface. I glanced around the room, but there was nothing, just the shadows cast by the dim light. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I knew something wasn't right. I had already heard the knocking. The figure from the photograph was haunting my thoughts. Now this, the scratching, it wasn't just the house settling, wasn't just the wind. Something was moving, something was alive. I moved cautiously toward the walls, my pulse quickening with each step. The scratching continued, almost frantic now. It was louder, like something or someone was clawing at the walls, trying to break through. My breath became shallow, my hands shaking. What was it? I walked toward the corner of the room where the scratching seemed to be coming from. There was nothing there, just the usual dust-covered furniture, the cracked floorboards, but the sound was undeniable. I stared at the walls, trying to make sense of it all. Was I losing my mind? Or was something truly wrong here? The lodge was old, yes, but it shouldn't feel this ... alive. It wasn't just the creaks of an old house, it was something more, something hidden. I stumbled backward toward the door, my thoughts racing. I had to get out of here. I had to leave, but the rules, the manager's warnings kept running through my head. Never leave after 10 p.m. Stay inside. Do not open the door after dark. But I didn't feel safe in the lodge anymore. It wasn't just the house, I could feel something else. Something in the walls, the floors, the very air around me. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The silence was deafening, and in the silence, I could hear something else. A voice, a whisper. It was so faint at first that I thought I was imagining it, but the longer I stood there, the clearer it became. Help me. I froze. The voice was low, guttural, and strangely familiar. But it wasn't coming from any direction that made sense. It was coming from inside the walls, like someone was trapped, crying for help. I felt the blood drain from my face. My body refused to move, locked in place by a fear that gripped me like a vice. The whisper grew louder, more desperate. Help me. Without thinking, I ran toward the door again, my hand fumbling for the lock. I needed to get out, but as I turned the handle, something pulled me back, the feeling that I wasn't alone. The whisper was coming from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. It was surrounding me, suffocating me. I bolted out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest, only to find myself standing in the same hallway where the knocks had come. From earlier, the walls felt closer, the air thicker. I could still hear the whisper, just barely urging me forward. But I wasn't sure where to go. The lodge was watching me, and it was waiting. The whisper was still there, lingering in the back of my mind like a constant echo. Help me. It wasn't just a voice. It felt like something more, something pleading, desperate, trapped inside the walls of the lodge. I stood frozen, unable to move as the sound of it pulsed through the air. It was soft, barely audible, but it was persistent. It seemed to come from everywhere at once: the walls, the ceiling, the floor, almost as if the very building itself was trying to communicate with me. The atmosphere in the hallway was thick, the air oppressive. I could feel the weight of the place pressing in on me, as though it was suffocating me from all sides. The closer I stood to the source of the whisper, the more disconnected I felt from reality. I didn't know what was real anymore, what was a trick of the mind, and what was something far darker. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped forward, my feet dragging heavily, each step taking more effort than the last. The faint whisper grew louder, more urgent. It was coming from the other side of the hall, the mirror. I remembered it. The mirror the manager had warned me about earlier. He hadn't said much, but there was something in the way his voice faltered when he mentioned it. Something about that mirror unsettled him. It unsettled me too, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with everything that was happening here. Something was drawing me toward it. My feet moved of their own accord, pulling me closer to the room I had been avoiding. The hallway stretched out before me, endless, the dim light flickering above, casting erratic shadows. I could feel the weight of the house, the lodge itself, as though it were watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong move. The whisper grew stronger as I approached the room with the mirror. "Help me." This time, it was louder, more demanding, as if the voice was on the verge of breaking, of calling out to me with a strength that couldn't be ignored. It was like it knew I was close, and it wanted to be found. I opened the door to the room slowly, the air inside instantly colder than the rest of the lodge. The room was dark, the only source of light coming from a flickering bulb overhead. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I couldn't stop myself from stepping inside. The mirror was at the far end of the room, its surface reflecting nothing but darkness. But when I looked closer, I saw something. A faint shape, a shadow that seemed to be moving, shifting within the glass. I stood frozen, unable to look away, my body unable to move, my breath catching in my throat. The figure in the mirror was not me. It was someone else, someone who looked like they had been trapped within the glass. It was a man, dressed in old, ragged clothes, his hair matted to his face, his eyes wide with terror. He reached out toward the glass, his fingers trembling, as if trying to reach through to me. His mouth moved, but no sound came. His eyes were pleading. I stumbled back, a gasp escaping my lips. The mirror, it was like a portal, a window into something else, something beyond. The whispers were growing louder now, more frantic. "Help me." The voice wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a scream, a desperate plea, one that rang through the air and settled deep within me. I could feel the weight of it, the desperation, the fear. The man's eyes in the mirror burned into me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary reflection. He was trapped in there, and somehow I was tied to him. The man in the mirror wasn't just a figure. He was real. I could feel him, see him. I had to do something. I couldn't leave him like this. I reached toward the mirror, my fingers brushing against the cool glass. The air grew thick, suffocating, as though the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. As my hand touched the mirror's surface, the world around me seemed to shift. The temperature in the room dropped, and I felt the cold pierce through my skin, down to my bones. The man's eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, I could hear his voice. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was loud, a scream that tore through my mind. "Get out." His voice was hoarse, filled with terror. It echoed in my head, as though he had shouted directly into my ear. "Get out before it's too late." The room around me seemed to twist. The floor beneath me felt unstable, as though the ground itself were shifting. The walls of the room seemed to close in, pressing against me, suffocating me. My chest tightened, and I gasped for air, but it was as though the very atmosphere in the lodge was alive, fighting to keep me trapped. I pulled my hand away from the mirror, but it felt like something was pulling me back. The whispers grew louder, more chaotic. "Help me." The man's eyes were desperate, and his hands pressed against the glass with a force that made the mirror vibrate. The glass began to crack, the sound of it splitting in the air like a gunshot. I backed away from the mirror, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but it was too late. The crack in the glass began to spread, running down the length of the mirror, in jagged lines, like veins of something dark, something that wasn't supposed to be. I turned and ran, but the whispers followed me, their intensity growing, their volume rising until it felt like the entire lodge was alive, screaming at me. The door slammed shut behind me, and I found myself standing in the hallway again, my body trembling, drenched in cold sweat. The mirror, that thing in the mirror, was it real? Or had I just imagined it? I didn't know, but one thing was clear. The lodge was no longer just a place. It was alive, and it was watching me. I could feel it in my bones. The rules, they weren't just warnings. They were survival tactics, and I had already broken one of them. I stumbled back down the hallway, my mind racing. The mirror, the figure, everything felt like a sick dream that I couldn't escape. I could still hear the whispers in my head, echoing like a broken record. "Get out." The words refused to leave, constantly reminding me that something was terribly wrong in this place. The lodge wasn't just a building, it was something alive, something that fed on fear, and I had only scratched the surface. I had broken the rules that everyone said would keep me safe, and now it was too late to turn back. I couldn't help but wonder if that was the point all along. What was the lodge hiding? I passed by the door leading to the storage room once again. The door was cracked open, just enough to catch my attention, as if it was calling to me. I didn't know why I was drawn to it. Maybe it was sheer curiosity, or maybe it was just the sense of impending doom that kept nudging me forward. Maybe it would have been better if I never came here at all. But now, it felt like I had no choice. The rules, the warnings, everything had been set in place for a reason, and I was about to find out why. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling as I twisted it slowly. The door creaked open, and the staleness in the air hit me instantly. Dust, old wood, and a sense of abandonment. The smell of decay filled my nostrils, making me want to gag. The room was dark, lit only by a weak beam of light that barely made it through the small window at the top of the wall. Shelves of forgotten tools and discarded items lined the walls, their contents covered in thick layers of dust. I took a hesitant step forward, unsure of what I was looking for. It wasn't the first time I'd been in this room, but something about it felt different tonight. Heavier, almost suffocating. There was an oppressive weight in the air, as though I had just stepped into something that was meant to stay undisturbed. My eyes fell on the back corner of the room, where an old wooden crate sat, pushed against the wall. It was a familiar sight, something I had seen many times before, but tonight it seemed to hold a strange attraction for me. I approached it slowly, my heartbeat quickening as I reached out to lift the lid. There was a jolt when I touched the crate, as though the room had suddenly shifted around me. The cold metal of the latch pressed against my fingers, and I felt a sickening feeling creep up my spine. Something was not right about this. I could feel the tingling sensation creeping up my arms as I opened the crate, but I couldn't stop myself. Inside, there was nothing but empty space. My mind raced, wondering why I had been drawn to this crate, why it had felt like such an urgent need to open it. But as I stared into the hollow void, something inside it caught my eye. At the bottom of the crate, partially hidden beneath old cloths, was a book. Its cover was old, the edges worn and cracked, and there were strange markings on it. Symbols I couldn't decipher, but they seemed familiar. The moment I laid my hand on it, I felt a shock. A sudden rush of coldness ran through me, and I almost dropped the book. But I held on, pulling it out from the crate and setting it on the floor. My heart was racing. The whispers in my head grew louder, more insistent. Help me. The voice was no longer just in the air. It was in my mind, in my bones. You shouldn't have come here. The words echoed in my head, and I could feel my hands trembling as I opened the book. I flipped open the cover, and the book's pages were filled with strange scribblings, most of which were too faded to read. But there were enough words that stood out to me: bound, sacrifice, chosen, leave. The more I read, the more the dread began to consume me. Each page felt like it was pulling me deeper into something dark. The words weren't just written, they were etched into the pages, scratched with such force that the paper was torn in places. One page caught my eye. It had a drawing, a map of the lodge, but the layout was different from what I had seen. This map was wrong. It showed areas that were sealed off, rooms that didn't exist, and paths that led to a place beneath the lodge. Beneath everything. I scanned the map, but as I looked closer, my eyes were drawn to a small cymbalan. Just like the one I had seen earlier in the attic. But this time, it was accompanied by words. They will come for you if you open this. They will come for your soul. I slammed the book shut, my hands shaking violently. What was going on here? Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the lights flickered. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like the lodge itself was alive. The shadows stretched across the walls, twisting and warping in unnatural ways. I turned to leave, but before I could make it to the door, I heard a sound, a scraping, just like the one I had heard earlier. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the floor. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. Something was in the floor. It was scratching at the wood, dragging itself closer. I backed up slowly, my legs trembling. The scratching grew louder, closer. It was right beneath me. I felt a sudden rush of air, and the ground beneath my feet shifted. The floorboard nearest to me suddenly caved in, dropping away into an endless darkness below. I gasped, my heart leaping into my throat. Something was down there, something that had been hidden away for far too long. I had to leave. I turned and ran for the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. The entire lodge felt like it was closing in on me, the walls shrinking, the air thicker. The whispering grew louder, frantic now, like it was urging me to leave, to escape before it was too late. But as I reached for the door, I heard the sound again, a soft thud, followed by a scratching noise this time, coming from right behind me. I turned, my eyes wide with terror, but there was nothing. The room was empty. The air was still. But the feeling, the presence, was undeniable. Something was with me. The air grew heavier, suffocating, and I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. As the darkness of the lodge seemed to close in around me, I ran down the hallway, my heart pounding as the eerie sense of being watched tightened around me. The weight of the lodge seemed to grow heavier with each step. It wasn't just the building, the air felt wrong, as though something invisible was moving, watching, waiting. My hands were slick with sweat, and I could feel the cold creeping in through my skin, seeping into my bones. I couldn't escape it. The whispers, the scratching sounds, the strange figure in the mirror, they had all led me to this moment. I had to keep moving, but I didn't know where I was going. I had to get out, but the lodge seemed to shift with every turn I took, its very walls bending, twisting, closing in on me. I reached a door, one I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked in a dark corner, hidden away as though it had been waiting for me to find it. The door was slightly ajar, and when I reached for the handle, I felt a sudden cold rush, like the air had been holding its breath and had just exhaled. I hesitated for only a moment before I pushed the door open, stepping into the room beyond. Inside was another corridor, one I didn't recognize. The hallway was dim, lit only by a weak light hanging above. The walls were covered in dark stains, and the floor creaked beneath my feet as I moved forward. But it wasn't just the physical decay that unsettled me. It was the unnatural feeling that radiated from the very walls. Something had happened here. Something had gone terribly wrong. I walked cautiously down the hall, each step slower than the last, as though the building itself was trying to slow me down to keep me from discovering what lay ahead. Then, at the end of the hall, I saw a door, the locked room. It stood at the end, silent, ominous, like a final warning. I could feel its presence even before I approached. The room was off limits, just like the others, but this one had a deeper significance. The door itself seemed to hum with something, a low, vibrating sound that I could feel in my chest. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I wasn't supposed to open this door. The rules had been clear. The manager's warning still echoed in my mind, but it was too late. I had already broken every other rule. What difference did one more make? I turned the handle, and the door creaked open. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped. It wasn't just a draft. It felt like the room had been frozen in time. The walls were covered in thick layers of dust, the furniture old and worn, and there was a sense of neglect in the air. The room was barely furnished, with only a single bed in the center and an old desk pushed against the wall. But what caught my attention wasn't the furniture, it was the strange markings on the walls. Scrawled in what appeared to be dark red paint were symbols I didn't recognize. They were arranged in a circle, surrounding the bed, as though someone had tried to trap something, keep it contained. A feeling washed over me as I looked at the symbols, dread, pure and simple. The walls felt alive, as if they were pulsing with a hidden energy, something ancient and dangerous. As I stepped deeper into the room, I noticed a small wooden chest. In the corner, it was old, and it looked like it had been there for years, forgotten by time. My curiosity tugged at me again. I had to open it. Something inside urged me to see what was hidden away. I moved toward the chest, my hands shaking as I crouched down in front of it. The latch was cold and stiff, but it opened with a soft click, and I slowly lifted the lid. Inside, there was nothing, or so I thought. My heart skipped a beat as my flashlight swept over the contents of the chest. It was empty, except for a small object buried beneath the dust. I reached for it and my fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. When I pulled it out, I was shocked to see that it was a medallion, a strange silver pendant with an intricate design. It looked ancient, like it had been crafted by hand, worn and weathered by time. As I held it, I felt a sudden surge of cold energy run through my body, as if the medallion was alive in my hands. It was warm, then cold, then warm again, like it was trying to communicate with me. The more I stared at it, the more unsettling the feeling became. I could feel the presence of something that had been sealed away for a long time. And in that moment, I understood. The lodge wasn't just a building. It was a prison for something far worse than I could imagine. I could feel it watching me. I could feel it stirring in the walls, the floors, the very air around me. It had been waiting for me to find the medallion to unlock the secrets of the lodge. My hands trembled as I put the pendant down. I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. But as I turned to go, I heard a low whisper, soft but unmistakable. I spun around, but there was no one there. The room was still, the shadows stretching across the walls like long fingers, reaching toward me. Leave. The whisper came again, louder this time, and I felt a chill shoot up my spine. It wasn't just the wind, wasn't just the lodge settling. There was something in here with me, something ancient, something that had been bound to the lodge for years, and now it was awake. I didn't know what to do. The rules didn't matter anymore. The lodge had already claimed me, and I was never leaving. As I stumbled out of the room, I felt the darkness close in around me. I was being pulled, sucked into the dark heart of the lodge, and I couldn't escape. The whispers grew louder. I felt the walls pressing in. I had opened the door, and now I would never be able to close it again. I ran down the hall, my pulse thundering in my ears. The air was thick with the weight of something ancient, suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled deeper into the lodge. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the lodge was actively resisting my departure, as if it wanted to keep me locked in its suffocating grip. The whispers had stopped for now, but they hadn't disappeared. I could still hear them in my mind, still feel their presence pressing in on me, telling me things I couldn't understand. The medallion, the symbols, they all pointed to something deeper, something that had been hidden away in the bowels of the lodge for years. But what was it? What did it want from me? I didn't know, but I had to keep moving. I had to find a way out before it was too late. I reached the far end of the hallway and stopped in front of another door. It was familiar, but not one I had ever noticed before. The door was different from the others. The wood was darker, older, and the air around it felt charged, like it was waiting for me. The door wasn't locked, but I hesitated. I had learned by now that the rules weren't just warnings. They were real. They had consequences. But this was the last door. I couldn't just leave it unopened, especially with everything that had been happening. I reached for the handle, and as my hand made contact, I felt a shiver run through me. The wood felt like it was alive beneath my fingertips, pulsing with an energy I couldn't explain. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to know what was behind it, but my body moved on its own, and the door swung open with a groan, revealing a room that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. This room was different from the others. The dust here was thick, as if no one had set foot in it for decades. The walls were lined with shelves, but they weren't filled with the usual discarded furniture or forgotten tools. They were lined with old photographs, hundreds of them, each one framed and hung neatly on the walls. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached the nearest one. The photograph was of a group of men and women, standing in front of the lodge, smiling as though they were happy to be there. But there was something wrong about the picture. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. The expressions on their faces were hollow, vacant, as if they were trapped. Something in their eyes told me they weren't who they appeared to be. I moved to the next photograph, and then the next. They were all the same hollow eyes, forced smiles, and the same eerie feeling radiating from each of them. The more I looked, the more unsettled I became. It was as though these people weren't caretakers, but prisoners. And the longer I stared at them, the more I felt like they were all staring back at me. I turned, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. That's when I saw Itat, the far side of the room. Hidden behind a stack of old crates was a small desk. It was neatly arranged, as if someone had left it in a hurry, but still wanted it to look organized. On the desk was a journal, the cover faded with age. I hesitated, my hand hovering over it. Something about this journal felt important. I could feel the tension building as I reached for it. As soon as I touched the journal, the room seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, thicker, like I was being suffocated by something I couldn't see. The whispering started again, but this time it wasn't in my mind. It was louder, coming from somewhere in the room, but I couldn't tell where. I opened the journal, flipping through its yellowed pages. It was a logbook, a record of the lodge's caretakers. But the entries were strange, full of cryptic warnings and disjointed sentences. The first few entries seemed normal enough: names, dates, routines. But then the tone changed. The sentences became erratic, almost frantic. One entry caught my eye. I think they are watching us. We've been here too long. I don't know if I'll make it out. The others, they don't seem the same anymore. It's like they're changing. I read more, my breath quickening. The next entry was even more disturbing. The lodge is alive. It needs us. If we leave, it will take us. They are waiting. I stopped reading, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the words on the page pressing down on me. I had to get out. I had to leave before it was too late. But then, as I flipped through the journal, I came across something that made my blood run cold. One of the photographs from the wall had been cut out, and a name had been written beneath it. John Miller disappeared last night. We don't know what happened to him, but we think he was taken. John Miller, he was in one of the photographs I had seen earlier. His face, once smiling, now seemed to stare back at me, his eyes filled with a desperation that chilled me to my core. He had been one of the caretakers, one of the ones with the vacant eyes, and now he was gone. Taken. The more I read, the clearer it became. The lodge had a way of claiming its caretakers. One by one, they had disappeared, absorbed into the lodge's dark and twisted history, and now I had become part of it. I had violated the rules. I had uncovered the secrets, and I could feel the lodge tightening its grip around me. I slammed the journal shut, my heart racing. I needed to get out. I couldn't stay here any longer. But as I turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The door was locked. I ran to the door and yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as though the room had sealed itself. I was trapped. The lodge had me. I heard the whispers again, this time clearer, louder in my ears. "You're not leaving." I turned in desperation, looking for a way out, but there was nowhere to go. The lodge had claimed me. It had claimed us all. There was no escape. The weight of the ring in my hand felt heavier now. It was like I could feel the darkness radiating from it, as though it was somehow tied to the very essence of the lodge. The whispers had died down for a moment, but they were still there, lingering, in the back of my mind, urging me to do things I didn't want to do, leading me down paths I had already learned to fear. The Watcher had been right. I shouldn't have opened the chest. I shouldn't have taken the ring, but it was too late. The lodge was already pulling me into its web. I turned around, my back against the cold wall of the attic, and the room felt even darker, more oppressive. The Watcher, his figure still lingered, his eyes filled with an emptiness that I couldn't fully comprehend, stepped closer, the shadows around him almost tangible, swirling and bending with each movement he made. "It's not too late," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. "You can still walk away from this, but you have to understand, the lodge won't let you go without a price." I could feel the weight of his words, the truth. Behind them, the lodge wasn't just an old building. It wasn't just a place. It was a living entity, and it had been feeding on the souls of caretakers, on anyone unlucky enough to wander too close for generations. I had become part of it now, and I knew, deep down, that there was no escaping it. I stumbled backward, the crackling whispers in my mind growing louder with each step I took. The Watcher didn't follow me. He just stood there, watching me as though he were waiting for something, waiting for me to break, for me to give in. I couldn't stand it anymore. The lodge was suffocating me, and I needed to get out. But where was there to go? The walls felt like they were closing in, pushing me toward the only place that had been unopened and untouched, the storage room. I turned away from the Watcher, my feet carrying me down the hallway once again. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the lodge was weighing me down, dragging me toward the dark corner I had avoided for so long. The door to the storage room was still cracked open, just like it had been earlier. There was something inside it, something I hadn't fully seen before. I knew that whatever secrets it held would be the key to understanding the lodge, to understanding what was happening to me. I forced the door open and stepped inside. The musty air in the room hit me immediately, and the darkness seemed to stretch out, swallowing up the weak light from the hallway. The room smelled of old wood, dust, and something else I couldn't place, a sour scent, like something had been left to rot for far too long. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with crates, boxes, and strange artifacts I couldn't begin to identify. But something caught my eye, an old wooden chest sitting in the corner, next to the large stack of crates. I didn't know why, but I was drawn to it. Something about it seemed familiar, like it had been there waiting for me. I walked toward it, my hand outstretched, as if I had no control over my actions. When my fingers brushed against the chest, I felt a sharp, cold jolt run through my body. A wave of panic surged through me, but I couldn't pull my hand away. I opened it, my heart racing in my chest. Inside the chest was a small leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling, and opened the first page. There, scrawled in neat handwriting, was a name, Lodge Caretaker's Logbook. I felt a chill run through me as I flipped through the pages. Each entry was brief but telling, and as I read on, I realized this was the diary of a previous caretaker, one who had documented everything that had gone wrong in the lodge. The first few entries were normal enough lists of tasks, routines, but as I read further, the tone changed. The entries became more frantic, more disjointed, as if the caretaker had slowly begun to lose his mind. One entry caught my attention. The whispers are getting louder. I hear them at night. It's like they're speaking directly to me, telling me to stay, telling me that I am part of the lodge now. They say that I'm never leaving. I felt my heart drop into my stomach as I read on, the words becoming increasingly disturbing. The others, they're changing. I can see it in their eyes. They are becoming part of the lodge. I'm afraid if I don't leave soon, I'll become like them. But I can't leave. The lodge won't let me. I flipped through more pages, each entry more terrifying than the last, until I came to one that made my blood run cold. I've tried to escape, but the doors won't open. I can feel it now. The lodge is alive, and it's calling to me. Don't know what it wants, but it's pulling me in. I can hear the others. They're still here, trapped, and they want me to join them. The last entry was a single word: help. I closed the book with trembling hands. I didn't need to read anymore. It was clear what had happened to the previous caretakers. The lodge had claimed them, one by one, and now it was my turn. I could feel the pressure of it, the oppressive weight of the walls, the eyes of the lodge following me as I turned to leave. But as I stepped back into the hallway, I saw something that made my heart stop. A shadow, standing at the end of the hallway, just beyond the light. It was tall, its shape vague, but I knew exactly who it was. The Watcher. He was watching me again, his vacant eyes filled with something I couldn't understand, something dangerous. He stepped forward slowly, and the temperature in the hallway dropped, a chill creeping up my spine. I backed away, my pulse racing, but he didn't stop. He kept coming, his figure growing larger, filling the hallway with his dark presence. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. The lodge had me. The rules, the whispers, the figures, the secrets I had uncovered, they were all leading to this. I wasn't just here to guard the lodge. I had become part of it, and I couldn't escape. The Watcher was getting closer, and I could feel the walls closing in on me. The darkness was pulling me in. I had broken the rules, and now the lodge was claiming me. I could feel the lodge closing in on me, like an inescapable trap. The Watcher stood at the end of the hallway, his eyes never leaving me, and the weight of his gaze felt like it was crushing me. My lungs felt tight, and every step I took seemed to echo through the silence. It wasn't just the Watcher. Was the lodge itself pulling me deeper into its grasp? It was alive, breathing, and I was its prey. The walls seemed to pulse, the floorboards beneath my feet creaking and groaning as though they, too, were shifting in response to my every movement. The air grew colder, more suffocating with each passing second. The whispers that had haunted my mind before were now louder, more frantic, swirling around me, urging me to move, to run, but there was nowhere to go. No escape. I turned down another hallway, my heart pounding, my breath quickening as I scrambled to find a way out. I reached for the door to the front of the lodge, but before I could reach the handle, the entire building shuddered. The ground beneath me jolted, and I had to catch myself against the wall to keep from falling. A sudden crack sounded from above, and I looked up just in time to see the ceiling split open. Dust and debris fell from the cracks, and the air was filled with the scent of rot and decay. The storm outside had intensified, but now it was inside as well. The wind howled through the building, rattling the windows, as if the very elements had joined in the lodge's twisted game. I could hear thunder, distant at first, but growing louder, closer. The storm outside wasn't just a natural occurrence. It was like the lodge had summoned it, like it was feeding off the chaos. The Watcher had begun to move, slowly, deliberately, toward me, and I could see that his expression had changed. The vacant emptiness was gone, replaced by something more sinister, something that looked like a grin. He was enjoying this, enjoying my fear. As he got closer, I stumbled backward, my breath ragged, my chest tightening. I could feel the weight of the lodge pressing against me. I was trapped. The air grew thicker, colder, and the storm outside raged. The whispers were now a full-on cacophony, voices crying out in terror, in pain. It felt like the entire world was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I turned back to the door, trying to reach the exit, but it was too late. The floor beneath my feet buckled with a loud crash, and I fell to the ground. The entire lodge shifted, as though it were alive and reacting to the very presence of the storm. I scrambled to my feet, but the walls were closing in, the ceiling was cracking, and the storm was no longer just outside. It was inside. The windows shattered as the wind surged through the building, and I could feel the force of it tearing at me, pulling me toward the storm that had become one with the lodge. The Watcher didn't stop. He just stood there, watching me with that grin, and I knew he wasn't just a Watcher anymore. He was the one who had summoned the storm. He was part of the lodge, just as I had become. The building was alive, and it was eating me alive. I tried to move, but the air itself was suffocating. The wind screamed through the broken windows, and the ground beneath me shifted again, the walls closing in. I heard the screech of metal, and the whole room seemed to collapse inward. I was on my back, staring at the ceiling, and I could see the walls twisting, bending, as if the very structure of the lodge was changing, adapting, and I had no control. I had lost all control. The Watcher was gone now, but I could feel his presence everywhere. The lodge had become the storm had become the lodge. They were one and the same. The ground beneath me cracked wide open, and I felt myself being pulled down, sucked into the depths. Darkness, coldness, and then nothing. I woke up gasping for air, my chest heaving as if I had been running for miles. The world around me was dark, still, but my mind was racing. The storm outside had died down, and the eerie silence that followed felt heavier than ever. The ground beneath me felt cold, unnatural. I was no longer in the attic or the hallway, wasn't even sure where I was. I was on my back, the floor beneath me rough and uneven. The walls were too close, closing in on me, as though the lodge itself was trying to suffocate me. I shot up, my breath ragged. My head spun, and I immediately placed my hands on the floor to steady myself. The air was dense, thick with the smell of damp wood and something else. Rot. It lingered, sharp, suffocating. The whispers were gone, for now, but I could still feel them hovering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise again. I looked around. The room, I couldn't even call it a room, was unfamiliar. The walls were made of stone, not wood like the rest of the lodge. Dark stone that seemed to absorb the light, leaving everything cast in shadows. There were no windows, just the oppressive feeling of being trapped in a cave, a tomb. The only light came from the flickering glow of a dim oil lamp hanging from the ceiling. Its flame danced in the draft, casting distorted shadows across the walls. I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me, and took in my surroundings. The stone walls had strange symbols carved into them similar to the ones I had seen in the attic. I moved toward them, drawn by an overwhelming compulsion to understand. What were these symbols? What did they mean? I ran my fingers over the cold stone, feeling the grooves, the carvings. They were deep, purposeful, not just random etchings. They were warnings I couldn't decipher, but I felt them. I felt the power of the symbols pulsing beneath my fingers. Then I heard it again, a soft scraping noise from behind me, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. I froze. The Watcher. Was it him again? I whipped around, but the room was empty. The silence was deafening. Yet I knew I wasn't alone. I felt it, something invisible, something ancient and powerful, watching me. It was the lodge, and it was waiting. I moved quickly toward the only exit in the room, a narrow wooden door, and tried the handle. It was locked. I yanked on the door, desperately, but it didn't budge. My breath came faster now, my heartbeat pounding in my chest. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here, but the room was closing in around me. I could feel it. I could feel the lodge drawing me in, the walls constricting as if they were made of living flesh. I turned back, panic setting in. "You can't leave," came a voice, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to seep out from the walls themselves. My heart skipped a beat. It was him, the Watcher. He had followed me into this room. The voice was not just his, it was the lodge itself, speaking through him. The walls creaked as if responding to the whisper, as if the entire building were alive, pulsing with an energy I couldn't explain. I stepped backward, my mind racing. The symbols on the walls, the whispers, the Watcher, everything was connected. I was part of it now. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The rules were no longer warnings, they were binding traps that the lodge had set for me, and now it had me in its grasp. I turned toward the door again, but the light in the room dimmed, flickered, and then the flame went out. The shadows around me deepened, and I could feel the weight of the room pressing in. The lodge was closing in on me. I heard the scratching noise again, closer, this time louder. The sound was coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, as if the entire room was coming alive. The room began to pulse, shaking, shifting, and for the first time, I realized this wasn't just a building. It was something ancient, a creature that fed on those who entered, trapping them in its web until there was nothing left. And I had walked right into its trap. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open, and I froze. Standing in the doorway was the Watcher, his face now fully visible. His eyes, those wide, vacant eyes, stared at me, filled with a hollow emptiness that sent a chill through my veins. His smile was no longer just a grin. It was something sickening, something that made my stomach turn. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly, his voice like a sigh, like he had been waiting for this moment for years. I took a step back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The air in the room had turned cold, freezing cold, and I could feel the chill creeping up my spine. The lodge was closing in on me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The Watcher stepped forward, his eyes never leaving mine, and I realized, with terrifying clarity, that I was trapped. The lodge had me. It was never going to let me go. The Watcher stepped toward me, his long, twisted shadow stretching across the floor. I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead. I stumbled, my body refusing to cooperate. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. The walls seemed to be closing in around me, and I could hear the crackling sound of something moving beneath the floor. Something was coming. something dark. I turned to face the watcher one last time, but I knew it was over. The lodge had claimed me, just as it had claimed all the others. There was no escape. The rules had been set, and I had already broken them all, and now I was part of it. I was part of the lodge. The walls seemed to close in on me as I stood there, trapped in the heart of the lodge. The watcher's eyes, cold and empty, bore into me as if he could see through every layer of my fear, my panic, my desperation. His smile twisted as he stepped forward, his movements unnaturally slow, almost predatory, like a shadow stalking its prey. I had no idea how I had ended up here, no idea how I'd fallen so far into the trap that had been set long before my arrival. But now, standing in front of the watcher, the reality was undeniable. I was part of this place now. The lodge had claimed me. I could feel the lodge's presence around me, in the very air I breathed, in the creaks of the floorboards, in the way the shadows stretched and twisted as though they were alive. The whispers had become a chorus now, growing louder and more frantic, their words unintelligible but filled with a sense of urgency. They were warning me, but warning me of what to run, to leave. It didn't matter. I was trapped. The door to the storage room had already closed, and now there was no way out. The watcher was blocking the only exit, and no matter how much I wanted to run, I knew I couldn't. The lodge wouldn't let me leave. I backed up, slowly, my legs shaking. Beneath me, I could feel the weight of the lodge pressing in on me, its dark energy wrapping around me like a suffocating vice. I turned, desperate to find some way out, but all I saw was the same hallway, the same endless stretch of darkness. It was like the lodge had become infinite, expanding beyond what I could see, trapping me in its eternal grip. I stumbled backward, my breathing shallow, my chest tight. There was no escape, no way out. The watcher was still standing there, his smile widening as he watched me struggle. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low, almost saccharine, as if he were enjoying every second of my torment. His voice was too calm, too steady, but it did nothing to ease the sense of dread that was rising in my chest. The whispers became louder, as though they were growing impatient, demanding something from me. "Help me." It was the same voice I had heard before, in the journal, in the photographs, in the mirrors. The caretakers who had been swallowed by the lodge. They had tried to warn me, tried to tell me what I was walking into, but I hadn't listened. I couldn't focus. I couldn't breathe. The lodge was alive, and it had claimed me. I had broken the rules, and now it was too late. There was no escaping it. "You're part of it now," the watcher whispered, his voice slithering through the air, wrapping around me like a curse. "You'll never leave." I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My legs were frozen, my body refusing to move. I was paralyzed, caught in the lodge's web, unable to escape the growing darkness. The watcher moved closer, his smile stretching further as he reached out to touch me, his hand cold as ice. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was trapped. "Belong here now," he said, his voice full of satisfaction, like he had one. His fingers brushed against my skin, and I could feel a shock, a jolt of cold that shot through my veins. The lodge was claiming me, pulling me deeper into its heart. I tried to push him away, but my hands couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat as the shadows around me thickened, coiling around my legs, my arms, my neck. I could feel the lodge, pulling me down, dragging me into the darkness that had swallowed so many others before me. But then, for a split second, I heard something else crack in the darkness. A sound like breaking wood, followed by the faint sound of footsteps. Turned toward the sound, but before I could react, the walls around me seemed to shift, pulling me in every direction at once. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. Suddenly, the watcher's face twisted in pain. His eyes widened in horror, as if he, too, had felt something shift in the lodge. He reached out toward me, but his hand stopped mid-air, frozen as if held by an unseen force. I tried to move, but my legs were still trapped by the growing shadows. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and for the first time, they weren't just whispers. They were voices, screaming, crying out for help, and the lodge shook with the force of it. I could feel the entire structure of the building trembling, as though it was alive, struggling against something powerful, something ancient. The watcher's face twisted into an expression of fear, his grin faltering for the first time. And then, a voice, deep and guttural, echoed through the room. "You should never have come here." I felt it. The lodge was fighting back. Something. It was happening, something that wasn't part of its plan, and it was powerful. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it pushing against the lodge's grip on me. The shadows began to pull back, receding from my body, and the air became thinner, more breathable. I could move again. My legs regained strength, and I quickly shoved the watcher aside, rushing toward the door. But as I reached for it, I stopped. It was as if time itself had slowed. I glanced back at the watcher, still frozen, his expression filled with fear. Something was changing. The lodge was losing control. I couldn't explain it, but I knew this was my chance. The rules, they didn't matter anymore. The lodge had always controlled everything, but now something was shifting. I could escape. I turned back to the door and slammed it open, stepping out into the cold night air. The wind whipped around me, and I could feel the chill of the forest on my skin. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I ran, my feet pounding against the forest floor, the trees whipping past me, the whispers still echoing in my mind. The lodge was behind me, but I could feel its reach, its grip still trying to pull me back. But I didn't stop. I kept running. I didn't know if I was free. I didn't know if I had escaped the lodge's power, but for the first time since I'd set foot inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. I couldn't be sure, but maybe, just maybe, I had escaped.